Hello and welcome. My name is Jerry Ford and I will be your host for this session, which is entitled Connecting Through Video, a case study in the potential of video-based feedback. Our presenters for this section are Dr. Cheri Ketchum, Dr. Daria LaFave, Dr. Chelsea Yeates, and Dr. Elaine Phompheng. We're excited that you've joined us today for this presentation. The chat window will not be open until the end of the session, so please save your questions until that time. Please welcome our presenters.
And I am here today with Chelsea Yeates, Daria LaFave, and Elaine Phompheng. And we are going to share some of the results of a study that we did recently where all of the instructors gave their students feedback via video. So, here we go. Okay, so when Canvas was first launched, in May, there was a lot of excitement about the ability to give students feedback via video. So I just thought before we jump in, we should really look at what we're getting into and weigh some of the pros and cons and also, mitigate any of the potential negatives. So I did some research on the topic, and there's a pretty consistent argument that video is an effective way to build relationships and that students seem to prefer it in most studies. So this is the video-based feedback on papers or whatever work an instructor might grade. I really think that we should have goals in mind in our use of video and that we should, track whether or not we achieve those goals. Now, in the research, there's very little evidence that it improves performance, and most of the research doesn't look at that. But it has been shown to build motivation in students and a sense of connection. And in an online classroom specifically, those are really important factors. We have few opportunities to build bonds with students, and any way we can do that, we should pursue. And generally, social presence has been shown to matter in the classroom. So just looking at some of the more general literature on why feedback matters, Henderson and Phillips argue that high quality feedback is the single most important influence on student achievement. So this is not just, something that is lip service. It's been shown to have an impact on how students feel about a course, how they feel about themselves, and this motivation factor can be important in how students do in a class. And the best type of feedback that is consistently argued in the literature is that it should really be designed to point to a gap between a student's actual level of performance and the ideal or what the performance expectations are. So feedback is deemed most useful when it gives the student information to close that gap and meet all the course expectations. So start your feedback by saying something like, in this paper, students were expected to do this. Here's how you did, and here's where you need to make some improvements so that you can meet all of the expectations. And the more specific advice we give, the better. So the potential of video feedback is that it is often reported that it is more informative, it's better at giving specific improvement, and this is very important, it enhances the ability to convey tone and is more personal and incomprehensible. So I had the feeling that this might not automatically be true. For me, it seems that you're going to have a similar quality of feedback in video as you would in writing. So the quality of the feedback is going to depend on the instructor. But I wanted to do a little research and see with our best quality instructors how video feedback went. So I teach and oversee COM 200, which is interpersonal communication. And this course really heavily relies on students sharing personal information and personal experience. So a trust is really important. So social connection is also very important. I had 6 instructors that I included myself. So I found 5 other instructors to help me out with this project, and we gave feedback on 3 of the 4 papers in the class. And they monitored the time that it took them to read, grade, and leave feedback on written papers versus a class where they only gave feedback via video. So we had two different sets of content or sets of data to compare. The class they did with just written feedback, and then a class they did with video. And these were high quality instructors who were chosen for their high peer review scores and their general reliability. I gave them professional development credit, and if they needed it, a webcam, or as an incentive, some editing software. And I looked at both the time that they spent, which they monitored on a spreadsheet, and then I also looked at the EOCS results. So I'm going to, in this piece, I'm going to cover the EOCS results and some workload numbers. And then Daria is going to discuss workload and some surprises that she found in the experience. Then Chelsea Yeates is going to discuss the connection she felt with students. And Elaine Phompheng is going to discuss how to overcome some of the challenges. And then I'm going to close with some remarks about whether or not I think we should pursue video. Okay, so I looked at the EOCS results, and again, I looked at a class for each instructor. I either chose the class right before or right after this one that they did video in, and I compared the results. And the first thing that I looked at was just whether or not giving feedback may have improved the completion rate of the surveys. So I have here the numbers, but I just wanted to point out that there was one instructor who only had 2 students complete the survey, which was only a 9% completion rate. Everyone else's numbers went up. So I have here a number with the instructor's number included and then without, so that you could get a sense of whether or not generally it improved the response rate. And you'll see here that it did. Even with that instructor included, we had a slight improvement, but with that low turnout not included as part of the statistic, there was a 7% improvement compared to the class with no video. And this is an even greater improvement against the COM 200 average overall. So generally in COM 200, we have about a 30% rate of completion, and in the class, generally, we had closer to a 40% rate of completion. Now, I looked at just a couple of the EOCS questions about feedback specifically. So there's a question on there about how feedback is useful to improve quality. And students reported, or we saw some improvement in the numbers. You'll see that in the non-video class, we were at about 4.39 average. With the video, we went up to 4.7. So there was a 7% improvement. And again, the second number is the number without that one survey, which not only was it a low completion rate of only 9%, but it was also across the board, the 2 students gave 100% positive on every single one. So that was not representative of the general ways that students scored the instructor. So that's why I gave both of the numbers, but you'll see that there's slight improvement there, slight improvement in whether or not the feedback aligns with expectations. And as you'll see, it was only lower for one instructor, but generally went up either 8.1 or 5.5%. And then I thought it was interesting to look at whether or not the student recommended the instructor. And you'll see that there's either a 6.7% improvement or a 1.7 improvement. And then whether or not they recommended the course. And here you see an 8.9% or 2% improvement. So there is generally some improvement across the board. Now, I also wanted to look at workload because I feel like, we have to really be aware of all the pros and cons of encouraging instructors to leave feedback via video. So again, these are results that compare a class where the instructor didn't give video feedback and then did. So what you should notice right away, and the reason I have all these numbers on here on this slide here, is that there is a lot of range in how long instructors take to assess student work. So there's a range in the week 1 paper, and this is a 2-page paper, of between 155 and 234 minutes, just in a class where they leave feedback via writing, traditional feedback. Now, I noticed that most instructors kind of stayed within a range, but then I had one instructor who ended up taking a lot more time. So I have just the general average, and that was 298 minutes. So you can see that's 100 minutes more than what the original average was. And if you compare that to an adjusted average where I took that one high number out of the group, then it was a little bit less, 80 minutes. But still, we've got like a solid hour and a half more time spent to give this feedback via video. And I just wanted to point out, some of these instructors only gave feedback to 15 students, and some gave feedback to as many as 25. So I also have a number here about how long it took per paper. So it took between 6.5 basically and 10 and a half minutes to do the video, to do the feedback without video. And then you'll see it pretty much doubles or more once we give video feedback. And again, some instructors took more time than others. So if we average this out, I came to about 6.5 additional minutes per paper. Now, I used an average of 20 papers that are typical in a class for COM 200, and you'll see that it adjusted about 2 hours per week. Okay, so we see similar results in week 3, but you also see in week 3 that the numbers start to normalize a little bit. And I think some of this is because the instructor is just getting used to this new pattern. So by the second round, it only took 36 additional minutes, but I just wanted to point out this is why I did the per paper average too. That one instructor only had 9 papers. But when you look at the real numbers, the most important number here is how much additional time it took. And the adjusted additional time is 60 minutes or an hour. And by week 3, it's actually the paper was in week 4. By the third round of doing feedback via video, you can see that the adjusted time is down to 46 minutes per week. So each week is an improvement, and that's something that we could probably anticipate across the board. But we should also be aware of just how big the range is, and how big the range is both in terms of, even without video, there's a huge range of time. So this was just eye-opening for myself generally. Okay, so I know I just speed through that. I only had 12 minutes to do this, and I'm at my 12 minutes now, so I'm gonna wrap it up. So pattern is each week we improved, the videos became shorter, it became less time consuming. And we have to be aware of potential tech issues. Some instructors had some tech issues, and we might need to require that instructors have a certain bandwidth if we're gonna ever require them to do that. We also might need to supply instructors with webcams. 3 of the 5 instructors needed webcams. And overall, I'd say we'd want to reduce the course load by 1 to 2 hours to still stay within the 12-hour limit. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Daria, who's going to talk about her experience with workload.
Hi, thanks so much, Cheri. So as one of the testers of this project, I wanted to talk about the workload issues that I experienced. So coming into this, I expected to spend much more time on providing feedback and developing and recording it, but I honestly didn't expect to have that many challenges. So first I found that providing video feedback took a lot more time overall, and Cheri had given you a good numbers to kind of indicate. I read and I marked papers as usual, but instead of providing a written overarching feedback, our goal was to present it in a video form. And because we aimed to keep the feedback to about 3 to 4 minutes long, kind of knowing that attention span of an online learning kind of wanes after that, I decided to script most of my feedback by writing it down, and so then I can focus on each of the graded elements and make sure that I touch on them. And this meant that essentially I found myself writing what I would have written to a student and then using that to guide my video recordings. So as Cheri mentioned, I was doubling my work. I also found that recording the videos came with a number of challenges. For instance, there were times when I had to re-record a video when I stumbled or said something and then I felt like I needed to reword it or start over. I had to stop recordings sometimes and come back to the process a little later because I found that it was very exhausting. After talking for so long, your throat starts to dry out, you just need a break. And the other, and probably one of the major issues that I came across was technology. So I am a Mac user, and in the first week, my Mac did not want to play nicely with Canvas. It just didn't work. In fact, some of my uploads took over an hour, and I think I was the one that skewed the numbers here because it froze my computer. I couldn't really work on anything else. It was really frustrating. Now, in general, I don't experience issues with my Mac, so my suspicion is that there may be some challenges between Mac and Canvas, and there are probably instructors who maybe not as many as PC users, but it's definitely something that needs to be considered. Let's see. Also, my audio wasn't working sometimes. It was just overall kind of really goofy. Eventually, I worked things out through the weeks, but it was really frustrating in the first week, definitely. Thinking about an online instructor, I felt like the approach probably would be asking a lot of them, especially having a strong knowledge of technology. And if you have Mac versus PC users, that's also something that would need to be considered. There were, however, some unexpected positives that are definitely worthy of mentioning. First, I found that my feedback was much more dynamic. I felt like I was conversing with each of my students and kind of connecting to them on a much deeper level. I found myself to be much more enthusiastic and more engaged in the guidance that I was providing, which allowed me to express my passion for teaching and for helping students. I also discovered some interesting new ways of wording certain things I was saying because I was hearing myself explain things out loud and then realizing that in some areas I needed an example or maybe saying it in a different way. So that helped. I was able to inject some positivity and some humor in my feedback, even in a time when it was negative. So for instance, I had two students who plagiarized their papers. And my recording of the explanation of why they earned a 0 and what they needed to do to avoid this in the future, I felt came across as more kind and less scolding as it would in a written feedback. And as a result, I've experienced sort of an identity thing. I was fulfilled with this feedback. I felt as a better instructor myself, and that was an interesting sort of self-improvement or self-concept sort of elevation there. So with that, I'm going to transition to Chelsea, who will also share with you her experience and connections with students.
Hi. So one of the goals for the project was to assess how students and the teacher connect and relate to each other after seeing and hearing the specialized feedback. And we wanted to examine how being seen influences student engagement and involvement. So not surprisingly, video feedback allows us to create a visual impression for the students. We're able to represent ourselves uniquely during the feedback and give the students a sense of who we are as an instructor with our nonverbal and verbal communication. And this gives us the potential to create a really warm and friendly atmosphere, which is what we would like to do. But on the other hand, if it's not done well, it can create the opposite effect. So one sentiment I discovered during the video feedback course was students expressing that they felt they were in an actual classroom or a real college. And other students commented that they like to hear my tone of voice and to see my nonverbal facial expressions, which is great because it's an interpersonal course and those are elements that we're discussing. And these nonverbal messages gave them more of an idea of what my verbal text feedback meant. And it gave them more context to understand the relational and content message of the feedback. I will say though that some students didn't want the video feedback because they said they processed information better if it was written and then they had a document of it. So I also saw an increase in messages from students, either commenting on material in my inbox, or they would post a comment under the video, or they would have general reflections on material that they wanted to discuss. So it was really cool to come across these discoveries with the students. And I generally don't see student involvement, positive or negative, after posting feedback in non-video courses, unless the student's like, hey, I forgot to upload this, will you grade it? And so it tells me that they're more comfortable reaching out to me and initiating dialogue. And I also felt more connected with the students, especially if they had a picture uploaded by their name. But this could also be because I spent a lot more time preparing and delivering feedback. And I was spending more time thinking about them and creating responses for them as opposed to my non-video feedback courses. The response I saw from student engagement aligned with a video feedback study by Peter Matheson in 2012, and he found that students felt that they were seen and heard, and they knew the teacher better by hearing nonverbals, and the class overall had a personal touch. So I was pleased to see that the same results were in my small sample. So the disconnection part. Alternatively, the connection felt one-sided if I wasn't able to see the student. I also felt personally insulted when they rejected my verbal advice on how to improve their papers. Like, I discovered I was actually looking forward to the next assignment to see their improvement, to see how they would integrate what I recommended. And then when it didn't happen, I would get a little upset and like, well, why aren't they listening to me? I felt like a diss. And I was also like, Daria explained that I was also worried about how my delivery would be received after a few hours of recording. I worried I would sound robotic or bored or disinterested because of the amount of time that the process took and the repetition of it. And those are all things that I didn't want to appear to be, and I didn't want to come across that way to my students. Another discovery was that I realized I really struggled with verbally telling students that they made a good attempt at a paper. My complex style is avoidance, and it felt like I was having to deliver extremely bad news to students who underperformed, and it gave me some anxiety. And I felt uncomfortable verbally telling my webcam where the student didn't succeed without feedback from the student. So the process felt personal yet disconnected because I couldn't see or gauge the student's response. But overall, the video feedback allowed me to create an emotional connection with students, and they were able to see me as a person, and it felt more comfortable reaching out to me. So now that I talked about my portion, Elaine will go into hers.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick look at improvement and motivation. Back to the literature, Matheson made an important acknowledgement in noting that we as instructors do have limited time, but there is definitely a positive to investing in effective and efficient ways to really push our students towards success. And two major areas were identified. The first one is understanding strengths and weaknesses for future improvement. One way we can do this through the video feedback is that we can target specific aspects of student content and approaches similar to the written feedback, where we can very carefully outline how they can achieve success and make positive changes. Another plus is that we have all different types of learners in our classrooms. Video feedback seems to be especially tailored toward those who learn best through oral, verbal, and visual means. So those students who really have those strengths can really flourish under video feedback. Also, as far as our time investment goes, feedback templates are ideal to work from. That'll just be a basic outline for us, and then we can target that and build in personal comments and observations that really get that student moving in the right direction as far as their own strengths and challenges go. Number two is maintaining student motivation throughout the entire course. All of us have seen situations where we have students who start off really strong in week one, and then they might slowly peter out through the course. One way to really keep them highly motivated is the video feedback, where it's a personal approach. They're seeing us, they're hearing us, we're talking directly to them and addressing things that are very specific to them. And that was one aspect that some students really appreciated, as we found in the feedback. As everyone has kind of noted, there was a general sense that there was an extra connectiveness that they felt motivated by actually hearing and seeing us, and that they felt like they were in a traditional classroom part of the time because of the video feedback. And that leads into the idea that instructors can provide, just really good face-to-face situations, opportunities for students to learn and grow. Some challenges to overcome. The biggest one is probably that students also have to make that time investment, meaning that they need to actually take notes on the verbal feedback that we're giving them. Whereas in written feedback, that's all spelled out for them and they maybe only need to go over it once. Verbal, they may have to go over multiple times to pull out the most important points. For instructors, the first round of feedback is more time consuming because we are probably developing our templates. We're working on timing. We've got equipment issues. There's a lot of different things that need to be addressed and fine-tuned in that very first round. So one thing to keep in mind is that, as Cheri noted, the times do improve and the efficiency does improve as we advance through the course and through the assignments. Finally, with my experience, I found that I was giving similar feedback as I would on papers, working from a template, and then also really honing in on what each individual student needed to work on and what their strengths were. It wasn't too much of an adjustment. The focus on the positive that I really like to carry forward through all my classes translated very well into the video feedback. And I'm going to hand it back over to Cheri now so that she can talk about if we should use video feedback in the future. Thanks.
Surprise, surprise. I think that, yeah, there I am. Okay. The results show that there's some slight improvement. You'll see it was especially with the feedback and recommendation of instructor. I think that we should not assume that instructors will need no additional training. And we can go ahead and turn on the chat so people can start chatting. I wanted to leave aside 5 minutes. We have 4 minutes to just take questions and talk as a group. So you can turn on the chat, please, and we can hear what people have to say. I'd say that we would need to actually provide instructors with some training, and we also will need to adjust the workload. We're going to have a range in quality, and I think that, you know, if you really look at the literature, it doesn't represent that range. I think that, like them, I repeated the pattern of finding good instructors to do my little case study, and most of the literature, I think, does that as well. So the next steps, I would say, are to expand the pool and compare the actual content that's in the video to what is in writing and see if there are actual improvements. I'd also say it would be interesting to get more in-depth responses from students about whether or not they preferred this style of feedback. And also, just one more side note, when they did the feedback, we did not leave them with written feedback as well. I asked instructors to just do one because I was really trying to gauge what the video would add to workload. Okay, so I'm looking at the chat now. So if anyone has any questions, I don't even know how many people are in the room because with the other you know, Adobe, I could see how many people were there and I could get a sense of, oh, 29 people. Okay, well, hi, Jim. If anyone has any questions or comments, we're willing to hear them. Maybe it's good that I only left 3 minutes for people to talk. Yes, I agree. I mean, it does kind of shift the workload as Elaine and I think that they all felt that they are the ones who will have to carefully go over what we said. Another thing that I think would be great if we could monitor is whether or not it improved the odds that the students would read. I'm curious if they're more likely to watch the video than they were to read the feedback. That's my
Yeah, one of my concerns was that the length of the videos were 3 to 6 minutes, and most students, I'm not sure how often they even read a paragraph, so I wasn't sure if they were invested in even watching 3 minutes worth of content for the feedback.
Right. Millie, I think what you're asking is whether or not we were able to like give them a link to the Writing Center. Is that what you mean? Okay.
So
Millie.
I think what Millie is asking for is were we able to share the resources, and keep in mind we were still providing them with written feedback within the paper. So we would use specific areas in the paper and identify, you know, for instance, here you're not using APA, here's a resource. So we could still use that. What we were focusing on when we were recording for the feedback was a general sort of, here's what your paper looks like, and here are the major elements that you need to work on, or here are some great things you did, and here's how you might improve moving forward. So that was our general feedback that we didn't write out, that we actually spoke to in our videos.
Right, and I would just say, well, at least the way I approached it is I still gave them the same type of in-text feedback, but the summary feedback I did via video. So the summary feedback is still a place where we could give them those resources.